Okay, Dr. Chris Lamont here, and this is a chat for Wellness Code webinar, lecture number 9. So after lecture's out, I get together with a chat for a few robust students who come on with questions and insights, and we share them in a little bit of a chat situation. So I like to record some of these and put them up there. So I kind of like to see the concepts and ideas out there. So that's what we've just been chit-chatting and telling stories. Where we're at in Wellness Code is just a really quick review, and then I'll see if there's any questions on the content, because we've just been chatting about life in general. And for the most part, in Wellness Code's a 12-month webinar. In the first probably 7 months, we started gearing up and preparing, having you reflect and start to get to know yourself. People don't know themselves very well. Thousands and thousands of books out there on testing, we find that we really think we know themselves, thyself, very, very well. But if the testing comes out, we really don't know each other very well at all. They even had a TV show there for a while, I'm told, about knowing your partners and knowing your own ideas, and people didn't do very good on it. So that's what we start to do. We really don't know ourselves. We have an awful lot of assumptions in what, and we push our assumptions. We try to market, we try to sell them. It just makes for more error, which is kind of interesting and frustrating too. So as we start to develop states, a different state, a state of wellness, I started a program with the premise in mind that wellness is not a longer list of things to do, or another promise that you're going to do longer things, more things, because you're not going to do it. Indication from all research indicates you're not going to do it. So it's not going to be a question of doing. It's a question of becoming something different. Now, what's unique about a human being compared to other animals? Probably because of our consciousness, that's the assumption. In our relationship with object-subject relationship in some of Lovinger's work, we start to see that when we become something different, the environment that we live in, our relationship, the environment we live in, also changes. Now, we may not notice any of that, but it also becomes quite different. So then we were something different. And I'll give you a quick example. If you go to school to become some type of professional, maybe when you graduate, you have to get a certificate, a license, pay a fee, at least find a job. When you go to work in that, there's a different state of your being. The education was our first 7 months of reflection, to know what you didn't know, what you thought you knew, what was going to be useful to you in your application, whether you come out being a veterinarian or a plumber. Nonetheless, probably plumber pays more. Nonetheless, whatever skill set it was in a professional, you then get into that state. I used to have a guy that I was on a pistol team that I've been a range officer for years and was a police range officer for years too. But I shot competition in a pistol team that was not associated with police. And one of the guys on the team was a doctor and a brain surgeon. And he liked shooting, and he used to come out and shoot with us. And he was on my team, and he was a really good shot. And we'd sit around after shooting and have beer and tell stories. And I would never remember that he was a brain surgeon because he was so loony. I mean, his stories didn't make any sense, and he's just kind of, out there. And we'd always tease him like he was the village idiot or of some sort, I mean, we'd just tease him, guys are. And we'd just give him a bad time. It's like, you got to remember that don't point the gun at your face to see if it's loaded, right? Things like that. We just keep reminding him because, he'd say, did you load it? And he'd go, I don't remember. It's like, it's scary. I just never put the association together, but he was a brain surgeon and quite credible. And he had even written some papers, and it was an amazing professional. He was actually a pretty good shot, but his skill sets of putting it together, keeping it organized, remembering to bring all the stuff he needed, remembering the sunglasses, remembering this, remembering that. Oh yeah, he couldn't get anything together. It was really, I had to call him the night before with a checklist. It was just, that was before computers. We had to call and make sure he had everything the next day. And then we'd have to stop in front of his house and pick him up, and we'd have to go through the checklist because he always was scattered, mostly scattered. So it was really interesting. Those are the natures of states. We would tease him, or I did later when I got it in my head finally that he was a brain surgeon. I said, do you ever go into surgery and forget to wash or anything? He goes, oh, no. He said, I got this down to a science. It's picture perfect. It's just that when I get away from this whole arena, my wife yells at me because I can't remember to put things away. I can't remember this. I can't remember that. I go out with you guys. I can't remember anything. But when I'm working, I get it all together. Those are states. We can have dozens and dozens, hundreds of states. Most certainly. Most of us don't have quite that many, but most certainly we can put those together. So to get into the nature of wellness in a time and a period in history where the issue is not just, I got a little cut and it's getting infected. I got lots of little cuts and they do whatever they do. It's chronic illness is what we're facing today. Chronic illness means that we make a stupid decision and we make it for 20 or 30 years consistently. And that's why we become chronically ill. That's it in a nutshell. It's not a one-time accident. It's simply consistently bad judgment. Somebody that smokes that doesn't stop smoking. Somebody drinks too much that doesn't stop drinking. Somebody eats food that spikes your blood sugar and sits there and says, hey, I've been eating this 20 years. It don't affect me. Well, give yourself 10 more years and you'll be a statistic. It takes 30 years of abuse to affect you. The healing's not so fast. Now, that's what it's all about. So getting into a different state means you learn to frame it in a different way so that your whole world evolves, so that you start to make better decisions. I know to some people I sound like a nutcase. I'm in a store and I'm looking at something and they say, well, that's a really good product. And I'm looking at it and it said, well, it says it's soybean oil, genetically modified. So already I'm not going to buy it. And it has, holy cow, it has the second item on the list is organic cane sugar. Like, come on, this is added sugar product. No, I'm not buying it. And they're looking at me like, well, that's a little over the top. It's not that much sugar. They can't begin to understand. I sound like a nutcase. I'm okay with that. They can't begin to understand. My state of being and my relationship to all those things is different than theirs. Maybe in 30 years, they'll be all chronically ill. And if we sat down and told them that it's because they've been eating that product for 30 years is why they're ill, they may or may not believe. And it may not even be true for them because each one of us has a unique matrix. And so my truth is not your truth and your truth is not my truth. And if you get to a place, science is out there and it's developing that technology right now. I have that technology on my gear, and I got that app, right, that tells me what spikes my blood sugar and what doesn't. Because I've done all the research, and I pricked my finger with every meal, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, after every meal I had for 2 years. My fingers, I got so tired of my fingers being sore on the edges, on the bottom, on the side. I don't know what a diabetic does. It's just like, it was irritating the daylights out of me because everything was, the tactile sense was it hurt, like a little paper cut, mild, but it hurt. It was a bump. I'd always kind of like, oh, it's a good thing I didn't play piano. Well, for several reasons. Number one, probably wouldn't be very good. And number two, it would hurt my fingertips. But I did all that for 2 years to take a look at my reaction to things. Because intuitively, what I would do, because my friends would say, let's go have pizza. And I'd say, yeah, sounds good for me. And we'd go out and have pizza. And then I started changing the nature of my pizza. I've had pizza with some of you guys probably out there. So I went to something different. I got rid of the tomatoes because I can't eat tomatoes. And I got rid of onions. I got rid of this. I got rid of that. I changed this. I changed that. Pretty soon I came to the realization after pricking my finger for 2 years that I can't even eat pizza. It's like, no, I should not eat pizza. I can't say that for you. It's not necessarily true for you. It's just true for me. If we're going to avoid chronic ailment, if we're going to get into that state of being, we have to have data and a foundation in that state by reflecting on it, researching it, finding it out, whatever it's going to take for you. I don't make it complicated. I'm telling you, you got to figure it out. That's what I've been telling you. I'm having you reflect on it. That was it, right? Okay. So let's take a look at a state as a metaphor. I found a little toy, right, to play with. You guys might recognize what these are. These are little jobbies that when you click them, they warm up, right? Little pads for Sona, whatever. They got a dozen different brands. I'm sure they're all made in China somewhere. So what's in here is sodium acetate. Sodium acetate at room temperature right now would be a solid. And it's room temperature, and this is not a solid. So the reason why this is not a solid is that energy was put into this, and then it was put into a smooth container. Now, what's fun, and I think I wrote this in a blog in November, what's fun about this is that without a bump in there, this will hold the energy from being heated up. It's not hot, it's cold. It's room temperature, but literally it's not affected. It doesn't become the product at room temperature until I put a bump in it. It needs nucleation, which is a little fancy word for a bump or an edge. When I put a bump into it, it will then release all that heat it's holding, and it'll change states. Energy flows in a human body when we change states. That's what it does. One state is created out of energy, the other state's created out of energy. There's a transfer of energy and a transformation that occurs. My practice during my lifetime has been because at somewhere way back in my youth, I started noticing energy exchanges and transformations of states. I would notice that when somebody was lying to themselves as well as me, their energy would fluctuate a little bit. I would notice when people all of a sudden got confident, their energy would change a little bit. I would notice all these things. You guys have done that too. We've been in classes together and we've talked about it. We've played with this stuff. So to make this work, because what fun is it? What fun is a prop unless we really make it? All I have to do is click this thing. And right there, as I click this, it's now starting to get hard. It was all soft, and now it's hard. It's also getting warm, which is kind of nice, right? But it's getting hard. You can see it's no longer opaque. It's not clear. It's getting solid. In about an hour, it's going to give off heat for about an hour. And then in an hour's time, this is going to be a solid. Now, all I have to do is throw it in a pot of boiling water for about 20 minutes, and it'll become liquid again. And this whole process repeats until the little plastic smooth bag fatigues, and then I have a mess all over the floor, right? But the nice news is, and it's on the floor, it'll become hard. I can sweep it up as crumbs. So I'll sit here holding on this hand, warming up my hand, which is kind of nice. So this is a state change. It's just really simple. It's not complicated. How hard was that? It wasn't hard. We changed the state of sodium acetate. We brought it back to a normal state of room temperature. You can have dozens of different states. We could change this through a multitude of different, we could store energy in it. We might have to get a little more sophisticated container if we got too fancy with it, because this wouldn't take a whole lot of pressure. But those are changes that go. So when we started looking at wellness code, the first thing we started looking at is the nature of a state and what it means. This is kind of my example, right? And then the next thing we build into it is like, what are the properties that to stay consistent? In this, some of the properties that needed to be consistent is it needs to have a smooth container at both ends of the package, right? It needs to have a clicking device in there so that we can reactivate it again. It's already got to be inside it, right? There's a whole list of things that has to be contained in this for this to be able to make those state changes. In lecture number 9, I went over 4 different qualities that you'll need to be able to make a state change. They need to be included in probably all state changes. I'm sure you've already have them in your world. I can almost guarantee you. I'm sure you guys have been through state changes. You may not have that label on them, but I'm most certainly sure that's occurred for you, right? I'm sure you've got warmed up a couple of times in some of those state changes, right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll can do all the above for you, right? Those are bumps for an awful lot of people, right? So that's a type of nucleation point for a lot of people. All right, so we just had 4 of them that I gave you: resilience, perseverance, creativity, and flexibility. I had you say the words out loud so you can hear the tone of it, because the nature of finding something inside everything is mapped out by feeling a certain sort of way, right? In the brain, the symbol for resilience, for example, the symbol for resilience feels a certain way inside you. We then create a symbol for that resilience so we can put it outside in the world and say, that is a product of resilience. I can feel that. I know what that is. That's resilience. We label it with a term linguistically, resilience. If you say the word resilience and you attend to the feeling, you bridge back to the feeling. It's language in reverse. We created the language going out, we're bridging back because we're starting to map internally. Big view, right? From the webinar before, we're starting to map internally. So wellness code is an application of a change that is a subset for the webinar that was from the year before, that's surviving the cultural change, right? Some people are surviving, some people aren't. Doesn't look real pretty out there. It's not going to get any better for a long time, right? Some people still think there's no global warming, or whatever. The good news is that most of these changes take around 300 or 400 years. So those people actually that don't think it's happening will be dead, and we won't be able to say, we told you so. And it's okay. It's all right. This is about you guys being able to kind of get ahead of the curve, being able to have a little warm pad in your hand if you want it, be able to reheat it and use it again, because they charge way too much for these to start out with. But you can use them, not an infinite amount of time, I'm sure, but most certainly you can use them more than once. This one I've used about a half a dozen times, right? So if I'm going to my wife's warehouse and I'm going to be working over there and counting things, it's cold, it's no heat in that place. It's 30 degrees, 34, 35, 37 degrees outside. I can take one of these, put it in my pocket, and I can hold it in my hand as I'm writing notes and counting things and actually keep my hand warm. So it's a very practical piece to have around. I can imagine these things would be really fun, but then that would get me into criminal territory. We won't talk about that. Anyway, fun stuff to play with. So that's really the start of it. We have to build something else into it before we launch that. We have to activate. We have to do the little clicker. In the next month's lecture, we're going to click it. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a way to click it. And so we're going to build the clicker into it. And then in the next month after that, we're going to go ahead and expand range out a little bit. That's your ability to click it, get it hot, and then put it into boiling water and get it back soft again. You need range for that. If you only saw this happen, you go, wow, that's magic. And the rest of your life, you'd be walking around with this hard thing in your pocket, wondering if the magic's going to happen again. To make the magic something that we have a relationship for, we have to expand that out into a world of I know. So those are the 3 classes of being able to take the technique in wellness code and integrate it into the state of your being. Then the very last class, the 12th class in wellness code, is kind of review the whole package. And I've been doing reviews as we come along. So this is kind of the first time I'm putting the whole thing out as like, this is what it looked like. I don't want to throw this out too much because I wanted to drag you through those first 7 months of being able to reflect on you. Look at some of those skill sets you have. Look at your relationship to stuff. I've had so many people come to me, hundreds, and say, I shouldn't eat that. Yeah, I shouldn't eat that to give me indigestion, but they're really good. Like, you mean those poppers that you like to eat that are peppers stuffed with cheese, and you eat 20 or 30 of them, and you got indigestion for the next couple of days. Yeah, God, they really upset my stomach, but God, they're great. Like, wow, isn't that amazing? What's wrong with securing? Let me find my prop. Excuse me. I have a prop. There it is. That's it. What's wrong with this? No. Right? This is audiovisual prop. Right? You can buy these for those who can't say no. You could glue this on your forehead and bump it against the wall. They need one that says done on it. But if they can't say no, the idea done would be way too advanced. I will, because I've got a few students out there that have been around for a long time, I'm going to throw a little more advanced concept into the tail of this before we go to questions, right? Just because it saves, it seeds it a little bit, right? Because I'd like to do some more advanced pieces, right? I'm getting some really good questions from some people. I will probably try to do a get-together, maybe in January or February. It depends. With a few of the local people, there's a few really smart local people around, and we'll get together in my living room here, and we'll throw out some ideas and play with it. And that's kind of like, it says my internet connection is fluctuating a little bit, and that's because I don't have it on a hard line. I got it on Wi-Fi, which is not very stable at best. But anyway, so the larger concept is this. Pretty much in what we refer to in the world of psychology as third order consciousness, which is just simply the act of being able to reframe things. Reframing, you remember? So it's like if somebody is able to do something and change the label on it, we've all reinvented themselves. My God, I've reinvented myself how many times, you know? People like, Cat Stevens this year is back on tour in the United States. He's reframed again. He came into, I mean, I like Cat Stevens. He came into kind of like when he was in the 70s, he came about writing music. It was a little bit novel. He went on stage. His opening act was with some hardcore guitar people that have been around for a long time in the rock and roll genre. He came in as a young person like the rest of them in a world of booze, drugs, and rock and roll and sex and everything, trying to find him, making a lot of money, which is always a bad thing for a young person to have more resources than they have brain power. And he stepped away from the whole thing and became a Muslim. And now he's come back, and this was his first year's tour. And he's back into the package of doing music. He won the Hall of Fame award, and I loved his speech. He said, who would have ever thought that someday the Hall of Fame would be including someone who doesn't drink, doesn't do drugs, doesn't curse, and doesn't sleep with anybody except their wife? Who would have thought? Rock and roll. And he got that. And I thought that great speech, being able to, he's not selling religion. He had to discover that roots of traditionalism, which he couldn't anchor in to his performance, I believe. And so he's back around. And there was a couple other things with studios and all the above that are really cutthroat. And for a young person, that's a lot of people taking advantage of you, which makes you very bitter. If you don't do a lot of drugs, drink a lot of booze, and get crazy, you have a hard time dealing with the bitterness. I think all of us out there have been bitter about things, and it's hard to deal with. It's hard to deal with the total ignorance that we sometimes see. So fourth level consciousness simply means that we start to recognize not only are we becoming, but at the same time when we become, we're changing the environment we live in. Old problem, we fought with it forever. We become something new. Problem goes away because now we're living in an environment. Does that show up as an image? None of this shows up as an image, right? And most people don't really build a very good relationship with it. But moving into the modern meme was moving in to fourth order consciousness. That's what it means. And moving into postmodern will be moving into fifth order consciousness. And I won't even begin to talk about that because I don't think we'll see very much representation for that for at least another 50 to 100 years. So no use even having the discussion, right? Because most of us here are not going to be around. But I'd be glad to have a little soiree, get together, in my living room, and we can have conversations about that. Maybe someday, if I live long enough, we'll wind up on a YouTube video, but I doubt it. Okay, so having said all that, let's see if I didn't shy off anybody. We've got 5 participants, and Julie, how you doing? And a number. The numbers are always get me because that's somebody sneaking in on their phone, which is fine. I love it. Okay, so let me throw this open to questions since I've put this to, and so let's see if we can keep the questions, because I'm recording, let's see if we can keep the questions closer to the content of what I talked about. I mean, I love talking to you guys about everything, but you know, it's like I'm trying to get the recording. So let's see. If not, I'll end the recording and then we can chit chat after that. Okay. All right. Do we have questions out there from anybody?
Actually, I do.
Good.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just perfectly.
And this is more of a comment of a picture that came up when you were talking about whatever it is you were just talking about. Right. That caused me to have this picture. Right. And you were basically saying something about, well, let's put it this way. I compared it to, and I don't know whether it was the Heisenberg principle or whatever the principle was. I thought it was Einstein who said that the act of observing a chemical reaction or some type of reaction changes it. I forgot what the name of that is.
Yeah, it's an uncertainty principle.
Okay, fine. So it sounds like you're referring to that principle that consciousness changes matter, except at a place of wider bandwidth, because we're able to embody a wider bandwidth.
Yeah, right.
Yay?
Really simple. I just read an article, really simple one. I'm planning a Valentine's trip for my love of my life, and so I checked out.
Oh, you shouldn't have.
But, yeah, and I checked out some hotels and restaurants, and I was looking at menus, and it's along the coast, so most of them are seafood restaurants, and we're not real big seafood people, and so I'm always looking for restaurants that have something other than chowder. So I'm going through reviews, and I don't care how great the fish was because I'm not going to eat that, right? So I'm looking at reviews, and one guy said, you know, it's really interesting, he said, when you go into a place to get seafood and you look, someone next to you has got a hamburger that looks amazing. And he said, I ordered the hamburger because it looked so good, smelled so good. And he said, to me, it was the best hamburger I'd ever had. And he says, and I went there for the seafood. And he said, the next night, I went back to the same place and had the seafood because that was my original goal, and I got distracted. The seafood was good, not exceptional, but local, fresh, good. Just, you know, could have been better. And so a year later, I went back to that same place for 2 nights. Again, I had hamburgers both nights. Still, great hamburger. So my recommendation is that if you go to the coast to a really great, supposedly great seafood restaurant, get the hamburger. It's better than the seafood. Those contexts of framing just means that we have an expectation that goes along with something. Uncertainty principles and expectation. If I see where it's at, I should be able to tell how fast it's moving. But we can't tell that. We don't have that type of relationship. We don't have that dimension. We don't have that kind of relationship inside ourselves with feelings. If I find a feeling and get a location on it because it hurts or because I can just track it, it doesn't tell me about its relationship with other feelings. Outside in the world, if you are sitting right next to me and you're sneezing, I might move over a little bit because I don't want to catch a cold from you. Actually, the truth is I wouldn't move over a little bit because I don't necessarily believe in that principle, but it's all right. I could see out there inside, if I got an ache on my left side, what does that tell me? Nothing, because that ache on the left side could come from too many variety of things. It's just way too many, right? Because of the fact that the sensors on the outside of the body, not on the inside of the body, it just tells you that whatever is going on inside has found its way to the surface to a sensor. It doesn't map very well. So we're learning a new state of being for us. Reason we practice this is that in a few hundred years, a new state of being for us is someone that can go inside and say, how do I feel about that? And how committed am I? And can I go the distance with that commitment? And what would that feel like doing that? We have stories about that now, but statistically, we don't do very well with it. As we start to map, I think that will become a stronger suit for humans. And so the uncertainty principle might become more certain as we start to get more data, right? As we get into, but what do we know about, you had sent me some notes on nanotechnology. What do we know about nanotechnology? The properties of all objects are different. So gold is really soft, copper is invisible in nanotechnology, can't see it. Like, wow, totally different, right? And what else do we know about nanotechnology that the Italians just found out about last year and got a reward for? Is that it's pretty much all unstable. If we don't have a known relationship with something, it can get unstable. It can get unstable. And that's what they do. So this is where we sit, keeping my hand warm. This is where we sit, right? It's like as we develop states and relationships to people, those are all going to seem a little more stable, but in a no-truth world, the next wave of no truth is not going to be that there won't be an absolute. The next wave of no truth will be that it's also not stable.
Well, would you consider that the lack of stability, would you consider that the lack of stability has something to do with, I'm sorry, I just had it. But the lack of stability has something to do with the references changing?
With the relationship. Absolutely with the relationship. When you take 2 nanoparticles, 2 electrons, 2 really small molecules, and connect them together without that space, right? Let me give you a concrete example that comes from, I just read it the other day because I'm traveling next year. I'm going to go to 2 Muslim countries for obvious reasons, right? Because we need to figure out how to get along. I need to figure out how to be, right? So I'm going to go to 2 of them. And so I'm looking at how Arabs communicate. And one of the things that I found is that Arabs like to have conversations closer than we Americans like to have conversations. An Arab feels a comfortable conversation is they can feel your breath on their face when they're talking to you. Different nature of relationship, right? We Americans don't like to be able to gee that much in somebody's face when we're having a conversation, right? So a waiter might come over and if you ask a question, they might get real close to your face to answer the question, right? It's like, wow, that's interesting, huh? But those are cultural pieces that are a little different. Those are relationship pieces that are a little different, right? Those are really small framing differences. 3rd order consciousness. But when we start to get to 4th order and eventually the 5th order consciousness, to answer you, Michael, is that at that point in time, those relationships are going to take really a different form. When we get to nanoparticles, we're moving that space in, connecting them closer together. They no longer resemble, carbon doesn't look like carbon, copper doesn't look like copper. The atomic table does not look as the way it appears in our world, not everything in the atomic table can we find on the planet anyhow. But some of them are just projections or possibles, right? And when we start to take the ones that we can find and we start to change them, move them around, change their relationship, they change in form. The instability is going to be there. Eventually, if we want to be able to make form changes, this is the fun part, maybe in 5 or 6 or 100 years or 2,000 years, we'll be able to make some form changes perhaps by having a different relationship with the structure that abides in us. Right now, the rules of structure that we have a relationship with dictate. As we change those rules of structure, it's not that been that way on the planet. As we change those rules of structure, things become, the world's becoming an adventure in alchemy, right? But it's going to be a slow process, not my lifetime. But it's starting to look like it's possible now. Before it was sci-fi. Now it's starting to look like tangible, real, but and most certainly a long time, right? Hey, Dick Tracy was way out there, way back when, right? And my goodness, we had watches that you could talk on. Maybe Apple stole the idea. I don't know. But anyway, it's an unfolding process. And that's where we're going. It doesn't fit into our world yet. It doesn't fit in. All the best we can do is start to realize that it will never be in this world that you and I live in right now. We will become something different that can manage all that. And then we'll be able to do something with that. Right now, if we had the knowledge, we still couldn't do anything with it. It's just like going to tribal people in some backwater place and give them information, and they look at you. Pygmies still think that depth perception is magic, right? I mean, book was written 14 years ago now, maybe I say when still it's 14 years, but they really believed it was magic. Depth perception was magic because they live in a place without depth perception. They live in a forest. So when they got out of the forest and could see a building, they got closer, it got larger. They said, that's magic. The building is getting bigger. We adjust for depth perception. They can't do that. They don't know how. They don't know how to do that. They just can't. Interesting, huh? So this is us becoming. They live in a different state of being, a state of being without depth perception. Eventually, they'll become someone that has depth perception. When that occurs, then they'll understand it. And their world will no longer be magic. It'll be normal. That's where it'll arrive at. And that's not the easiest thing to understand because it's not the way it appears to happen to us. It's not the story that our intuition says is familiar. But what I believe in, right? I believe in it's all a becoming. And I have been sitting with that belief ever since I noticed that I didn't want to become the people around me. I wanted to become something different. And that was somewhere at age 5, and I didn't know how. I couldn't even frame it. I couldn't find fault with them. They were wonderful people. I didn't have an issue. They were sweet people, and they treated me wonderfully. I didn't have a problem with it. I just didn't want to become them. Other people would have been happy to become them. I was not happy to become them. And I know all you guys out there are trying to become something, right? You're sitting in front of this device, getting information, hoping to become something. And if you're thinking it's a to-do list, you're going to be disappointed. It don't work that way. That's third order consciousness, and we ran the gamut of that. And we moved into the modern meme over 100 years ago, and it's unfolding in a different sort of way. Will you notice the difference? Remember Piaget's work with those kids, and they, with a glass of water half full, 2 glasses. Remember that story? It's a famous story anyhow. He actually took a film, and the kids made a decision that was wrong, of course. And a year later, he asked them, and now they have learned, and they knew the correct answer to his question he asked them. but they denied they didn't know the year before. They say it never happened. You will never remember being you today. You will arrive somewhere different and you will think you'd always been there. That's the way the human mechanism works. Cool. So yeah, most certainly uncertainty.
And you're talking about something that has nothing to do with transhumanism.
It has something to do with everything, but I'm not too sure how it'll all unfold. When you start to put limitations on it, like, will that have to do with this spot over here in this location? I think it's going to have something to do with everything.
With everything. And scientists have, I've run across stuff where scientists have discovered, have started to talk about other DNA structures that they didn't know existed.
All of that could be absolutely true. Yes. And most of that conversation has come down because they found DNA structures and they found also biome in your gut, bacteria in your body, because some of it is not stable at room temperature. It's a state change. So literally when they take the DNA sample, the little swab in your mouth, there are some of them that vanish as soon as you take that out of your mouth. And so they're now going back and they extract samples of spinal fluid, right, which has a robust example of the DNA in your body under a high pressure controlled condition. And they're finding all kinds of stuff to explain that, Michael, that they didn't know existed because it went up in the vapors, right, or whatever you want to call it. The same thing with gut biome, right? They used to think there were so many and they had names and labels for them. And now they've found another 30 or 40,000 of them that, like, oh my God, as soon as they come out of your body, they go away. Or the bigger one next to it eats it, right? It's a balance in your body. This whole track is a balance in your body. The hardest thing to understand is not about knowing, it's about maintaining a balance. If you know how to jump out of an airplane, you're going to have to find a balance to make that landing a little slower because the sudden stop is not good, right? And so it's all about balance, not about knowing. We have been educated to think it was about knowing. Made a lot of fools out of people that know. It's really all about balance. And what's really cool about balance is that 50% of the mechanism in here, in this lower brain that has more neurons in this brain and has no language, but it's all kinesthetic, it's all feelings, which we haven't mapped yet. This one is 50% at least foreign DNA. So this is an agreement. Balance is a product of an agreement, not a product of you knowing. If you don't have agreement, you're in big trouble. I love it. I watch bicycle races in France, and I watch them going around a curve, and I watched one guy hand on his bicycle. He's going around a curve. They're all leaning, and there was a drop of sweat came off of somebody's nose that landed on the other guy's hand as they're going around a curve. So this guy's nose is gravity still at play, right? Maybe a little bit of wind each. But this guy, and you can see the guys, I watched it, and the guy just shook his hand a little bit like that to get the sweat off his glove. He just shook his hand and just went back to, so they're that close in a pack. They've got this relationship, and they're moving as a unit. And everybody's looking for a window or a place where they can break out. Breaking out is kind of dangerous. You get buried in a pack and you can't break out. That's where we sit as a human race. We're all in a pack. And the ones that are different aren't really very different. They like to think they're different. They most certainly have a different sense of self, but the difference is not all that grand. So when we start to, and we don't remember. I tell people stories and they look at me like I'm really antiquated, but you and I have both been on the planet before computers were around. I was there a little bit longer than you because I'm older. I can remember being in college my junior year and electronic engineering using a slide rule to calculate those things because we didn't have adding machines yet. Texas Instruments just came out with an adding machine and it was really very expensive. And I didn't have the money as a student to buy an adding machine or a little calculator, yeah, that's it. So I was scratch paper and slide rule is how I was working my calculus and trigonometry formulas. And you look at people today and they look at you and it's like, to be an engineer today, probably anywhere from 60 to 80% of all your studies is going to be computer geared because you really need to write a program and not know a bunch of stuff. All the stuff that we had in books as engineers, we had to look up all the time. Now it's in the computer and it just finds it, locates it. World is totally different. I'm not sure that any of my education as an engineer would be of any value today. It's so dusty that it would just be an artifact at best. And someday all this dialogue will be an artifact at best. And people would say, you hear that? It's just somebody 40 years ago had all these stupid ideas here bouncing off. It's like, wow, how dumb were they? Whatever. That's the nature of becoming. Not easy to get in here because we don't have that as a story index yet. Someday we will. But right now, for the average person, it's not. If you look at your life, you see it unfold that way. They're not willing to have a conversation about it. Hey, nobody eating that pizza that upset, when I was eating that pizza, let's make it personal. When I was eating that pizza and upset my stomach, I never was bright enough to say I should quit eating that crap. Nothing wrong with the pizza. The pizza was good. All my friends weren't getting sick, but I was. It's like, I was the dummy. They're still eating pizza. That's fine. And they didn't gain weight. I gained weight and got upset. And I'm finding more food that as I separate from foods, because I've been doing it all my life, as I separate from foods, I'm going, wow, do I feel so much better having abandoned that for a while? I got people that give up dairy for a year and go, I feel so much better. And then 6 months later, go back to eating ice cream and dairy products and stuff and say, I'm eating it now and I don't feel any different. So I don't know. I must have just been, well, yeah, because it's going to take, introducing it back to your diet might take 2 or 3 years to get you back to a tolerance level where it's going to abuse you again. And you won't notice that. So don't put it back in. If it comes out and you feel better, leave it out. I have not met very many people that have that level of discipline. I have met a lot of people that have taken it out and put it back in again. I have met a lot of people that have quit eating pizza because it upsets their stomach and are still eating pizza. Not quite as much. Or it's like, it don't bother me if I just have it once a week. It takes 40 years for you to become chronically ill instead of 30. What about that is so complicated to understand. When it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Do you think this is going to change? Your signature biome stays the same after you separated from mom's biome for your lifetime. And only modern medicine can screw it up. Isn't that nice to know? My hand's still warm, but it's fading, which means I'm probably going to have to fade. Any other questions out there? All right. I don't want to get just too long-winded as I post it up. So I'm going to end recording.